Now, one of the most bizarre criminal defense cases I have ever been involved in involved barking dogs, an elderly defendant, and a spiteful neighbor. We will go over all of the case details of this insane case during this video. The defendant was an elderly lady about 70 years old. She had resided at her house almost all of her life. Her and her late husband had bought it shortly after they got married when she was in her early 20s. Now, everyone in the neighborhood knew her. Everyone in the neighborhood loved her until the day her dogs barked too much. Her two small dogs were older as well, for dogs, 9 and 11 years old, I believe. She had a regular routine with the dogs, and the dogs knew their routine. Up at 5 a.m., and the dogs go out for about 10 minutes. They do their doggy stuff, and then they come back in for breakfast. Late morning, the dogs go back out to do, more dog stuff, this time for about 20 minutes, then back inside. Then lunchtime, then nap time. Mid-afternoon, she let the dogs back out, this time for about an hour, so they got to do some more of that dog stuff and get some more exercise in, then back inside. Early evening, around dinner, they go back out for about 10 minutes. Then around 9 o'clock, they go back out for a few minutes before bedtime. Her schedule with the dogs was meticulous, to say the least. If she forgot, the dogs reminded her. They knew exactly when they were supposed to go outside and do dog stuff. Now, I was able to confirm this schedule with most of her immediate neighbors, relatives, and friends. They all gave me pretty much the same timetable for the doggy day schedule. This becomes very important when we look at one of the neighbor's allegations, and we will discuss those allegations here in just a minute. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. The house was an older, quaint residence in a more affluent neighborhood. The backyard abutted two other houses, both of which had fencing between their yards and the defendant yard. One was a 6-foot privacy fence. The other was a corner lot house with a chain link fence about 4 foot tall and only about 6 foot long until it met up with the adjacent neighbor's privacy fence. The backyard had a 6-foot privacy fence as well along both sides. The only open exposed area was this 6-foot long piece where there was a 4-foot chain link fence. The backyard is fairly good sized, about 2,000 square foot, with several seating areas, walking areas, shrubbery, paths, places like that for the dogs and the owner to be able to wander around in the yard. Now, a new neighbor had moved in about 6 months prior. It was a single woman in her mid-50s, and on occasion she would have one of her adult children stay with her from a previous marriage. Now, shortly after she moved in, she had filed a complaint with the city about the defendant's dogs barking all of the time. The city had gone out several times and had never observed the dogs barking any of those times. Then the woman gave a tape recording of dogs barking for a very long period, about an hour to an hour and a half, and alleged that this was our client's dogs. She also then told the animal control officer what times of day the dogs were allowed to go out and bark. Lo and behold, the animal control officer showed up in the neighborhood that afternoon, the same time our client let her dogs out, and guess what happened? Lo and behold, her dogs barked. Now, according to the officer's report, he could see and hear the dogs from where he was standing along the sidewalk about 50 feet away from the corner of the defendant's backyard, near to the chain link fence. He stated he stayed there for about 5 or 10 minutes, about 15 feet away, and the dogs barked almost the entire time. Due to his findings, he wrote up a municipal warning ticket and gave it to our client, letting her know there were numerous complaints about her dogs barking all of the time. Now, this was just a warning ticket, and our client couldn't imagine her dogs barking all the time. But she took some precautions for a few days, sat outside with her dogs for each of their outside periods, and they never barked once. She also talked with several neighbors, all of whom stated that they never hear the dogs barking excessively, and they couldn't imagine who would report that to the police. They all thought maybe there was some type of a squirrel or a rabbit or some other animal that was enticing the dogs to bark. Now, about 3 weeks later, our client gets another visit from animal control. This time, he is issuing a municipal ticket for disturbing the peace due to the dogs barking. He again stated he continued to receive numerous complaints and that she will need to go to court this time or pay a fine. Now, this was a ticket. It has a fine attached. I think it was like $50. So all she had to do was pay the fine and everything should be fine. She did another few days sitting outside with her dogs and there was no barking. She paid the fine and she assumed everything was going to be okay. She started making it a habit when she could to sit in the room near to the back door just to listen for the dogs. Another few weeks go by and lo and behold, she gets another knock on her door. This time, much to her surprise, there's a regular police officer along with the animal control officer. They inform her that they were still receiving complaints and due to her inability to stop the dogs from barking, it has escalated to a misdemeanor punishable by a fine of up to $1,000 and 30 days in jail. $1,000 fine and 30 days in jail. That is what this sweet little old lady heard from these officers. They gave her a summons this time to appear in court. No fine that she could pay. She had to go to court. She was totally distraught, completely taken back, and genuinely in fear of losing her livelihood. Court day comes around. She goes with a good friend. She hears the complaint against her and also finds out that if found guilty, she could indeed be fined, sentenced to jail, and her dogs could be taken away from her. Now she has never been in trouble all of her life, not even a speeding ticket. She is in total fear now. She obviously pled innocent, and then a trial date was set. Now there was another huge piece of evidence that she found out at court that day. While at court, she received for the first time copies of the animal control officer's reports as well as the police report. In these reports, she found out the times of day they were coming by, the days that they were doing this, and the one single person who had been filing these numerous complaints. Much to her surprise, it was that quiet new neighbor with the 6-foot abutting backyard to hers with the chain link fence. When she read the comments, the complainant wrote, she was flabbergasted. She accused her dogs of barking all day, nonstop, most days. Now, she had no idea what to do, so she called an attorney of hers that worked with her on financial and estate matters. This attorney was also a client of mine who I have worked with many times on many different cases. But this folks, was the most extraordinary case I worked with him, to be sure. The attorney contacts me, he sends me all of the discovery he has, and asks me to open up a full investigation into the matter. He also informs me about how scared our client was, being threatened with jail time and losing her dogs. The first thing I do is interview the defendant at her house. During this visit, I also get a tour of the residence, the backyard, the side yards, the front yard, and I get to meet the dogs. The meeting was also scheduled in the afternoon at the same time she lets the dogs go outside. So, hang on. You won't believe what happened when she let the dogs outside while I was there. Now, she had only been letting them out for about 2 or 3 minutes a few times a day up to this point, and she had paper down on the floor to let the dogs do, well, their dog stuff right there inside the door in the house. That is how afraid she was because of the entire situation. Now, I went out to the sidewalk where the animal control officer stood, according to his report. Then she let the dogs out. Here they come, rambling, running, bark, 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 looking right at me. Then they got to the fence. They stopped barking. They turned around and went about their business, playing in the yard and doing doggy stuff. 3 barks, that's it. 3 barks, nothing more. I stood there for an entire hour. The dogs were outside. I never heard another bark from them. Okay, so the dogs had met me when I was inside, so maybe they had just recognized me. That may be why they didn't bark very long at me. So I tell her, we'll try the same thing the next day, but I would just have someone else out there with me. We wouldn't come to the house or anything like that prior. Next day rolls along. I bring another investigator with me, dressed in blue dress slacks and a blue shirt, similar to what the animal control officer would be wearing. And I have him stand there while I observed and videotaped from a distance. Right on schedule, the client lets the dogs out. Bark, bark, bark. And maybe a 4th bark. They run to the corner, look at the other investigator, then go about their doggy business. They stay outside this time for 60 minutes and no more barking except maybe the occasional little bark when a car drove by or a neighbor closed the door, that type of thing. Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the investigation. What would you do at this point? Now, my next step was to place a security camera with audio and motion detection watching the backyard. I then instructed her to let the dogs out every day on their regular schedule. I had access to the video and the audio remotely, so she texted me each time before she let the dogs out so I could watch. I also instructed her to stay close, and if she heard the dogs barking a lot, then bring them back inside. Now, day 3 of this rolls around. She lets the dogs out about mid-afternoon. Dogs go bark, 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 and then they go about their business. About 10 minutes later, I see the lady from the corner house, the complainant, come out of her garage, walk over to a little table and a chair that she had set up under the tree by the corner of the chain link fence, and she set something on the table. And the dogs were barking and barking and barking. She then walked back to her garage and into the garage, and then I see the client open the door, and she calls the dogs back inside. Now, the client called me and asked if I knew what the dogs started barking at. She wasn't able to see what I saw on the camera from her back door. I just told her I may have, but I need to review the video. After all, she's not my client. She's my client's client, and I don't want her to go off the deep end if I told her what I had observed. I then went back through all of the video that I had, almost a week's worth of video. The backyard, remember, it had a motion detection activation on it. I had observed on several occasions every day. The lady from the corner house, the complainant, walked outside, sat down at that little table, sat in that chair, and she read books. The day the dog started barking, it appeared that she set a recording device or something like that on the table. Now I knew it was her little quiet spot. But why all the drama? I had also conducted a background on her, and I found out that her ex-husband was a judge in a neighboring county. I also noted from the divorce records that he, not her, got custody of their kids when they divorced. That was some years back, and the kids were teens when they got divorced. Now, what would you do next? Well, I decided to interview her former husband, and boy, did I get a lot of useful information. Come to find out, she was very intelligent, but she was also mentally unstable. When they were married, she had done similar things with their neighbors, but just threatened them to have her judge husband throw them into jail. Now, I wasn't sure I had enough evidence yet, so I discussed things with the attorney. We decided we needed some physical evidence regarding how much noise the dogs could make on scene. As the complainant stated, she heard the barking from inside her house, which was just 15 feet away from the defendant's yard. Back on scene, I measured everything up in the client's yard. I took aerial shots from the internet, and I marked up all the measurements, how far it was from corner to corner, how tall the fences were, how long the fences were, everything that you can think of, the exact height. I recorded it all. Now, I couldn't go onto the neighbor's yard to measure things, but with all of the other measurements I had of nearby structures and features, I was able to come up with some very good assumptions of measurements on the complainant's yard. First, the residential structure of the complainant is about 15 feet away from the corner of the fence. That was true. However, this is to the corner of a detached single-car garage. About 10 feet from that garage is another garage that's attached to the residence, a 2-car garage, and then the residence itself. There's no living space above the garages. So really, the closest spot on the actual residence to the closest spot along the fence is actually about 45 to 55 feet away, quite a distance further than what the complainant had stated. I also did several audio-video runs with the client letting the dogs out. I set up a camera on a tripod in that corner looking at the back door of the client's residence. I also had a sound meter mounted to another tripod in front of the camera, so it captured the meter's readings of the sound that was going on. Then I had the client let the dogs out at their normal times, and I recorded it. In all, I got 3 recordings, 3 different days, 3 different times. I knew the prosecution wasn't going to let this testimony in. They were going to object to this non-scientific testing procedure, as I'm not a sound engineer, so I can't testify as an expert to this. So I never wrote up a report. I just told the attorney, submit the recording, and if accepted, only ask me what it is, not what it represents, while I'm on the stand. That is exactly what happened. Defense presented it, DA objected, judge allowed it as part of my work product, not as an expert witness. This showed that even at their loudest, the dogs were nowhere as loud as some of the traffic on the side streets. I had recordings when there were small trucks and buses, things like that passing by, so it worked out very well. Compiled with the information that we had regarding the complainant's past, yes, we subpoenaed her ex and we got testimony from him via deposition. All of the neighbors' counter remarks to the complainant's complaints and the recordings, we were able to get all of the charges dropped. It is my understanding that the complainant sold her house not too long after that. You know what? It feels good to get a win. But man, what a cost to our defendant. She had to spend tens of thousands of dollars defending herself against a barking dog complaint. Lesson number 1 here, I always say, it may not be a capital case, but I treat them all the same. No matter how frivolous the case sounds, give it your all, folks. Lesson number 2, definitely think outside of the box. I had to do that a lot, like having somebody stand there for hours on a sidewalk to prove the dogs weren't barking, or setting up the cameras. Now, I set those cameras up to record the dog's activities, but what I got was evidence of the complainant setting things up. Lesson 3, know your limitations, folks. I have heard of attorneys trying to push a PI's findings in court as an expert witness for things that they are not experts in. Sometimes it flies, but most of the time it won't.